Mirror's Edge Catalyst didn't feel right to me, at least at the start. The movement felt very rigid, the combat felt very, very clunky, and very contrary to the movement. The story was uninteresting, and the world was kind of shallow. So I spent the first few hours of Catalyst wishing I was playing the original Mirror's Edge. I imagine as a developer, having people wish they were playing a game that came out 8 years ago instead of your sequel to that game is not what you're aiming for. So despite all those negative feelings, about halfway through the game, everything kind of just clicked. Like the movement started coming much more naturally, the combat meshed with it much better, and altogether that made all the fighting a lot better. I was starting to get invested in the characters, and the story was actually engaging, if a little predictable, but still engaging. It was coming together. I was still wishing I was playing the original Mirror's Edge, but I was quite enjoying Catalyst. For those of you that have played Catalyst, it was around the midpoint of the game where everyone starts dying. I guess that's a spoiler, but the game came out 4 years ago. And yeah, just things were feeling much better. At that point, I actually liked a lot of the characters, even though they kind of sucked at the start. The story was actually moving. It wasn't just a series of tutorials. The first 3 hours of the game are just tutorials and fetch quests. It's really sad. So all those positive things said, Catalyst, by the end of the game, was thoroughly enjoying it. Still got some major issues with it. Mirror's Edge does not benefit from being in an open world. And I think that's not specifically because it's now an open world game. I think it's because it's in this open world. I think there is potential for an open world Mirror's Edge game. This isn't the execution. To start off with, the open world's actually really good. It starts off really well. It's really refreshing. It was a lot of fun to explore the environments. When you start seeing more and more of the city, you realize how samey it is. So most of the districts that you first get, like the first 5 areas, are all very, very similar, just with different color schemes. The environments, in terms of how you traverse them, feel very samey. So not only is it hard to differentiate between all those central districts that you first get, it's also hard to differentiate between areas within those districts because it all feels very samey. And I think part of that is due to the art direction. I think Catalyst has worse art direction than the original Mirror's Edge. That's not to say it's bad, but it lacks the character and impact. It's nowhere near as striking as the original Mirror's Edge was. So once you start trying to navigate throughout the world without using the runner's vision thing, the little red streak, which is really helpful a lot of the time until it stops working. Sometimes it just doesn't work. And then you kind of have to just run around and keep mashing Alt until it pops up again. But trying to navigate without it is impossible because there are no real landmarks. The city is very flat. Now, visually it's not like that, but in terms of the actual environment that the player can navigate, there's not a lot of verticality because you'll see in the skylines here, there's tons of really tall buildings, none of which you can actually interact with. There are some where you'll see a ledge on the edge of a building and you're like, okay, cool, I can make that jump. But then there's no hitbox for you to grab onto. And you're like, oh, okay. Sure. And the same goes for all the things below, the player level. There are a lot of buildings that are I don't know if I die or not from making that jump, but I'm gonna try. And then it puts you in the instant death animation instead of the, oh, you fell too far animation. It really makes you realize how little verticality there is in the actual playable environments. The background environments, gorgeous. Very utopian city dealio, but isn't representative of the actual play space. That said, a lot of the missions put you in some of the larger buildings, and then you have a lot of verticality, but you can't access those areas in the open world, so you can't go back to them. You have to play through the game again, which not ideal. So once you do your own exploring and stuff and you come to realize, oh, the play space is not very vertical, there's a lot of inaccessible areas, it makes you feel very limited, even though it's an open world. Catalyst also falls into the typical open world trap that is developers have to split their energy between the main story content and fleshing out the open world. They're both important, but there needs to be a balance. Catalyst doesn't really have either of those. The main story content is good. I wouldn't describe it as anything more than good. It is more polished than the open world. It feels much more in line with the original Mirror's Edge, but there's not a lot of it. If you go through the campaign just doing the main story stuff, which isn't easy because you do need to get upgrades and stuff, and just doing the main story won't get you there, but if you just do the main story stuff, it is maybe 8 hours. That's including like all the time running between missions, and there's a lot of that. And that was without using the fast. I didn't use the fast travel until I had finished the game. I didn't realize there was fast travel. You might be like, okay, that's like not awful. That's not great. Like there's more open world content, but the open world content is very shallow. You've got delivery missions, dead drops, interventions, data leaks, security chips. Now, most of these are bad. Not in the sense that that sort of mission is bad, but all of them are the same. All the delivery missions, you start at one person and you go to another person on the map. It is a set route. If you deviate from it, you're probably not going to make it in time. Like it just gives you the best route. That's boring. The dead drops are basically the same thing, except you go from one delivery box to the other delivery box. Again, not fun. The data leaks are good collectibles because you can just run around and pick up most of them. And then the ones that you can't just run around and pick up, they're like little puzzles. And some of them you can't get until you unlock other abilities and stuff. And that's good. It gives players reason to go back and do things. And there's a lot of them. So like, good collectible. Bad collectible is the security chips because A, they're not very visible. B, there's a whole lot, there's a lot of them. And given that they're not very visible, that's not great. See, it's very counter to Catalyst's whole philosophy about movement, because movement is kind of the core selling point of Mirror's Edge. Because you have to stop and do a little animation to pick them up. So it just kills your flow. Overall, Catalyst's open world, okay out of 10. Story, also okay out of 10. So it makes it feel like, okay, we didn't get an open world game like Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild's main story content is okay at best. It's there. But the thing is, Breath of the Wild has a wonderful open world. It feels like a living world, which Catalyst doesn't. It has things to find that are like a good variety and all feel like they're part of the same rhythm. You've got like tons of little environments. Even if you don't necessarily get anything out of them, it's like you found like a little secret, like you found like one of the fairy ponds. Or if you go up to, I can't remember the name of the mountain, Satoshi Mountain, and you find the glowy horse thing, I can't remember what it's called. There are lots of little moments like that where it feels like the world's alive. It feels like you're actually interacting with it, and it's fun to explore because you constantly feel like you're going to find something interesting. Catalyst's world is so samey that you don't feel that. I feel pretty similar about the Korok Seeds, to be fair. The collectibles aren't great. Like, at least Breath of the Wild has the great open world. Catalyst is just okay and okay. And Breath of the Wild is also gorgeous. Its art direction is phenomenal, even though if it is not, look. Breath of the Wild is gorgeous from an art direction perspective, but on a technical level, it's not that pretty. Textures are kind of awful in some areas. Some of the models are also not great. But for the most part, the art direction makes up for that. Catalyst is the exact opposite. The art direction is fairly mediocre, especially when compared to the original Mirror's Edge. On a technical level, it's gorgeous. I'll throw some footage over me talking now, but it's a gorgeous game. But it feels like every utopian city ideal that you see in media. It's just this perfect white city, and then all the underground underdog people are in the not pretty white parts of it, and it's uninteresting. The original Mirror's Edge also has that issue, but the character that comes out of it with the much more striking visual design, the higher contrasts, the much more intense use of color, and also just the better set design, the way that levels are designed in the original Mirror's Edge are way more interesting and gives you way more moments where you're just like, shit, let me stop and take a screenshot because this is gorgeous. I didn't have that a lot with Catalyst. Like, all the set pieces felt like set pieces, and that was about it. I was like, yeah, this is cool, but I feel like I've seen this before. Another issue I had with Catalyst was the music, and it's kind of not great, but let me explain, because there's more to it than just it's not great. The first act of the game, so the game is split into 3 acts, and each time you finish an act, so if you're in Act 1, there's Act 1 open world music, Act 2 open world music, and Act 3 open world music. Act 1 open world music, super bland, super forgettable, felt really generic. Act 2 and 3, much better. Still not as good as the original Mirror's Edge, but much better. It didn't feel like I had seen this in Blade Runner or seen, yes, because I can see music. It didn't feel like I had heard this in Blade Runner or Total Recall or some other dystopian, utopian media. And then the second, third acts felt more in line with the original Mirror's Edge, where it had more character, it felt more dynamic, it felt more active. All the first act music felt very passive. And I guess that kind of goes in line with the story, because the first act of the game is very passive. Like I said, it's all fetch quests and tutorials. Act 2 and Act 3's music felt much more fitting for the game, because it was more active, it was more dynamic, it had much more energy to it, and that was really good. And especially in the story missions, the music there is much more fitting than the open world music, But then when you finish the game, it goes back to the Act 1 music in the open world. Why? I mean, I guess it narratively ties in with the story. I guess I can go into spoilers. The game's 4 years old. It sort of ties into the story where at the end of the game, you blow up the Kruger Tower and you're like, oh, everything's gonna be okay. Faith has like a little monologue cutscene, which is like, you'd expect all the people in the city of glass to be disgusted and revolution, and then no one does. And things just went back to how they were. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a great ending, and it's just very, very, very poignant and I think relevant, because that's how the world kind of is at the moment. People will get angry about something for a little while, and then when they're done being angry, things just go back to how they were. From like a storytelling perspective, it makes sense that after that cutscene, it goes back to the Act 1 music, because the Act 1 music is like the hero's journey, you're coming back to the start, but that music sucks. So then, back to what I said at the start. While I was playing Catalyst, even when it was feeling really good, I wanted to be playing the original Mirror's Edge. So when I finished Catalyst, that's what I did. Probably, unsurprisingly, my nostalgia was wrong. In some ways, not always, but in some ways. Catalyst is the better game of the two. It's more complete, it's more polished, characters are better, just the writing in general is better, even if the story is kind of but the original Mirror's Edge also has kind of story. That said, there's a lot that the original Mirror's Edge did better. I've already spoken about this one a lot, the art direction. I'm just gonna put some clips up now. The game's gorgeous. It came out, quick maths, 12 years ago, and it still looks amazing because the art direction is really good, because there's that constant use of contrasts, not just between like light and dark, but also contrasting colors, and it's always so striking. Just throughout my whole replay of the original Mirror's Edge, I kept taking screenshots, and I don't normally do that. I'll put a screenshot of my screenshots here now. I think there's like 4 screenshots from my entire playthrough of Catalyst. Because the game is just kind of visually boring, especially when compared to the original, which had, I don't think it's fair to say it has perfect art direction, even though that's what I wrote in the script. But its art direction is really good, and Catalyst falls short on that. Some things obviously don't hold up, like when you put your face up against a wall, which is a lot of the game because you do a lot of climbing, the textures don't hold up. That's expected. 12 years old. That said, there are also a lot of spots where Catalyst's textures don't hold up. So I'm not going to minus points for that. I also briefly touched on how the original Mirror's Edge had much more fitting music. Because it was an entirely linear game, the music is pretty much perfect. It's tied to events as you go through the levels, and because of that, the music always feels like it's closer in tone to what you're feeling and experiencing than with Catalyst, where you're in an open world and it has dynamic music, as in like it changes when you go to different areas, and like it's one music when you're standing still and one music when you're running. There are variables to it, but it's still not as interesting. Another thing I really liked about the original Mirror's Edge is when I died, the load times were really short because you had those linear levels, so you only had to load basically like this tiny area, versus with Catalyst, when you died, it took fucking forever to load. It was probably only 15 or 20 seconds each time. But that feels like a lot, especially in such a fast game like Catalyst, especially if you're trying things and you're like, okay, I can totally make this jump. And then you keep trying to make that jump and you're like 90% sure you can make it, but you keep dying and every time you have to wait 15 to 20 seconds. It's really frustrating, but I think that's also just part of the scale of the game and kind of unavoidable. So going back to what I said about Catalyst being the better of the two games, as much as I know people won't like me for saying that, it is the better of the two games. Admittedly, only in a few ways, but in a few very important ways. The movement is way better than the original Mirror's Edge, which is exactly the opposite of what I was feeling when I was playing it. But then I went back and played the original Mirror's Edge, and God, I thought Catalyst was rigid. The original Mirror's Edge feels like a game that came out in 2008. The movement is very static in comparison. It's much more scripted. You do have to hit the right movements at the right time. It's much less dynamic and open than Catalyst is. The combat in the original Mirror's Edge is awful. I don't think anyone's gonna hate me for saying that. It's bad. The hand-to-hand combat is not good. It feels slow. It doesn't feel like it's in line with the movement at all. And the guns also just feel out of character for Faith, for one thing, but also just they don't feel very good. The guns are bad. So when I was doing this replay through, I was like, okay, let me just play it as a pacifist run. Like I can disarm people, but don't engage in combat. Game feels way better like that. And you can't do that with Catalyst, because Catalyst has a lot of scripted sequences where you have to beat everyone in the room to like get the elevator to turn up or whatever. But that doesn't suck, because Catalyst's combat is good. It flows with the movement much better than how the original Mirror's Edge tried to combine the movement and combat. The directional attacks, really cool. The different like traversal attacks and stuff, also really cool. And it also actually feels pretty good. The variety in enemy types is also better. Catalyst did make combat more of the game, but they also made the combat better. So I'm gonna say that's a win. But okay, enough about the original Mirror's Edge, because this you see the title there? That's talking about just Catalyst. And I've gone on too much of a segue. Catalyst is good. I don't know if I'd recommend it at full price. I think it's 30 Australian dollars on Steam at the moment. I obviously can't say whether it's worth $30 or not, because it's a very subjective thing. Some people just have more disposable income than others. In general, I would also say it's a good purchase because the original Mirror's Edge is also $30 on Steam for some reason. Don't buy it for $30. The game is not substantial. It is 4 hours long if you get into the rhythm, but also you might get motion sick. That's probably a big thing to point out. I think watching the video, you can probably tell if it'll make you motion sick or not. Yeah, so if you can't tell from the title of the video, this is part of a series I want to make called Backlog Bust, where I just go through my backlog and talk about games that came out a while ago and aren't really relevant anymore, but I want to talk about them. If you enjoyed my critique of Mirror's Edge Catalyst, hey, thank you for watching, and subscribe for more. There's the big red button. I don't know. I think it's there? I don't know. Press that button and you'll see when I make more backlog bust videos or more sort of critical analysis-y video essay sort of stuff like this video here about Doom Eternal and Dark Souls sharing some attributes. Make another linear Mirror's Edge game, please.